Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Michael A. Bryan. Now, what I'm not going to do that I usually do is I'm not going to tell you guys what the day is or what the time is, because I realize that it's a little bit arbitrary and not necessary. But what I will continue to do is bring you guys wonderful case studies from my own Horary Astrology files so that you can see not just how I use Horary Astrology to create clarity and meaning and insight within my own life, but I'm also going to be bringing you other people who are practicing Horary astrologers from around the world who have used Horary Astrology to bring insight and depth and meaning both to their lives and also the lives of their clients. Now, if you're new to the podcast, please do like and subscribe by clicking the link down below. And if you want to find out more about me and the work that I do, please visit my website, www.tarotdharma.com. Now, if you're not knowing what Horary Astrology is the divinational branch of astrology that deals with answering burning questions within the hearts of people who are known as the querents in a moment of great need for them. And in my opinion, Horary astrology is truthfully the basis of all systems of divination. So whether you practice tarot or I Ching or runes or astrological geomancy, all of these systems of divination really are only crystallizations of the potencies of astrological factors at that specific moment in time in relation to the life of that person. So, truthfully, when it comes to asking the question, how does divination work? Or why does a tarot reading work? Or why should the I Ching bring such powerful insight to the life of people? I personally feel as if the various systems of divination that we practice only serve to crystallize in symbolic form the astrological factors at play within the lives of the querents. So for me, the ghost within the machine of all divination is really and truthfully astrology. So on the True Divination podcast, I'll be bringing you people who practice astrology as its own subject, but I'm also going to try to integrate other people who practice other branches of divination so that you can see how the moment of Horary astrology is also the moment of all divination in general, and I'm really excited to do that. So if you're interested in that, once again, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can continue to see the wonderful, wild, magical world that is Horary astrology, but also astro divination. Now, in tonight's episode, I'm going to be delving into yet another love horary because, as a colleague of mine once said, 90% of the work that we do as Horary astrologers usually pertains in some way or another to love questions. And maybe that might be specific to his work, but I've also found it very true in terms of my own work that people really come to astrologers and to tarot readers and to oracles because oftentimes they have a burning question about love. And if it's not love, it's finances. And if it's not finances, it's family. And if it's not family, it's career. But those areas of human life are always more or less the areas where people come and seek guidance. And every so often, you do get the occasional client who wants to know something about their spiritual life or how they can live more in harmony with their spiritual ideals. But within my personal practice, I found that most clients are coming because they want to know something about their love life or their career. And usually they ask both questions within the same session. So this evening, we're going to be taking a look at another love horary. And I remember this horary quite vividly because when this person reached out to me for it, she asked, am I in a healthy relationship? And the first question that she asked was really, how can I build a healthy relationship? And because I always ask my querents, is that really the question that you want to know? Not necessarily to bring doubt within their minds, but really to make sure that they're searching within themselves for the core essence of what it is they're wanting to know. The question that she landed on was, am I in a healthy relationship? Now, something that my classical Horary Astrology mentor, Lee Lehman, said to me was that when people come asking questions like, am I with the right person? Is he the one? Is she my soulmate? Is this my twin flame? Am I in a healthy relationship? All of these different variations of this fundamental question of, is this person the person for me? Then chances are the answer is going to be no. Now, I have seen cases where the answer has not been no, but truthfully, they've been few and far in between. Because what Lee said was that when people come with that question within their minds, chances are there's already been something shifting within the fabric of that relationship that has led them to have a sense of doubt, or that has led them to have a sense of discomfort within the context of the relationship, which is why they're asking the question in the first place. And that rule has proven true within this question as well regarding, am I in a healthy relationship? Because what the Horary chart said was, you most definitely are not in a healthy relationship. And it articulated reasons as to why. And the fundamental reason as to why within the context of this chart was that this person was so gung-ho about being in the relationship that they were in, whereas the other person had other things on her mind and had other things that were important to her, and none of those things really seemed to be the querent who was asking this question. And as I was giving the reading, I was reminded of something I had learned from Nahira Wahid, where she says that you can be in a situation where you're with someone who is madly in love with you, and that person may still not be ready. That person may love you in ways that you've never been loved before, and still not be in a place to join you or meet you on that bridge. And whatever the reason is, you have to leave. Because you should never, ever have to convince someone to join you on that bridge. And you should never, ever have to convince someone to do the work within themselves to be ready. And this is someplace where we oftentimes fall short, because we as humans have a connection to the things that are meaningful to us. And at the point at which we establish a meaningful relationship, we oftentimes find ourselves in a place within ourselves where we're unwilling to leave the fabric of that relationship because it's taken on such a reality within our lives. But oftentimes we have to leave. And truthfully, we shouldn't have to force anything or anyone to come into shape in order for us to have the sort of relationship that we truly desire. So with that being said, let's take a look at this Horary chart for Am I with the Right Person to see how this story panned out. Here we go. So here's the chart for Am I in a Healthy Relationship? And here are the details for the chart in the corner, should you want to pull this up on your own software. Now, the first thing that I see in this chart is that we have 27 degrees Scorpio rising, 6 minutes. So not only do we have late degrees of the sign rising, it is also Scorpio that is rising. Now, I tend to take a lot of the things that the ancients say in their aphorisms with a grain of salt, insofar as a lot of it was really, really intense, and also, I dare say, a bit on the side of being extreme. But what the ancients have said in relation to Scorpio rising charts, Scorpio rising horary charts, or even event charts, or even electional charts, is that we should be very wary whenever Scorpio is rising, because Scorpio rising brings a sense of falsity to the matter propounded. Now, in the 21st century, I don't necessarily think that it means that the querent is intentionally trying to be dishonest. But what I found in many Scorpio rising charts, charts of myself included, is that whenever Scorpio is rising, it brings a sense of a person being so gung ho emotionally about the final outcome of the situation that they're asking about, that they stubbornly remain fixed in the state of mind that they have regarding that situation. So I remember I asked a question about the potential of moving someplace, or doing something new. And it was something I was really passionate about, but I was passionate about that thing for all of the wrong reasons. And it was a Scorpio rising chart, and I can't remember if it was late degrees or early degrees, but it was a Scorpio rising chart. And what that meant for me was that I was too fixated on a singular outcome for the situation that I wasn't willing to see other ways in which the situation could have unfolded. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's going to be true for every Scorpio rising chart, and maybe it hasn't been true for you if you also practice Horary Astrology, but that's just something that has seemed to stand true within the context of my own practice. So that's the first thing that I see moving into this chart. And so we look for the ruler of the ascendant as being the significator of the querent. And here we have the ruler being Mars, essentially debilitated by being in its detriment in Taurus at 29 degrees, which is also the Anaretic degree, or the dying degree of Taurus. So our querent fundamentally within herself is in a bad state because she's in her detriment. And there's something fundamental about detriment that I think we have to bear in mind, that detriment itself means being worn out, or detriment itself is literally a state of destruction. And within the context of our astrology, whenever planets are in their sign of detriment, they are in a sign that is literally the opposite of a place that they would consider to be their home or their domicile. So if we think about the imagery or the symbolism that comes up with a planet being someplace completely opposite to the place that they've built for themselves and the place that they call their home, it gives us a very real understanding of how this querent feels within the context of this question. Now, there is a counter argument to that that says that, well, if a planet is in the house of relationships, in a relationship question, and that planet signifies the querent, then it says that that person is willing to debilitate themselves, for lack of a better word, in order to facilitate the relationship that they're wanting to be in. I'm of two minds about that. And I think that there should be other things within the chart that corroborate that assertion, and not just saying that if Lord 1 is in Lord 7, then that means that X, Y, Z is going to happen. But what's interesting about this chart is that not only is Lord 1 in Lord 7, Lord 1 is in Lord 7 at the final degree, or rather, Lord 1 is in the 7th house at the final degree of Taurus, and moving out of a state of being essentially debilitated by being in detriment to within 1 degree being peregrine in Gemini. So what we see is that our querent is moving from bad to worst, while still within the context of debilitating herself for the relationship that she's in. So what this could be saying is that the querent may be under the quote unquote control of Lord Seven or the person who she's asking about, or the querent is in a state where the relationship that she's in is fundamentally harming her and pushing her further into a state of being harmed or being peregrine, where we feel lost and confused and without having any true connection to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So that's fundamentally the state of affairs of the querent. She is weak, and not weak as a moral judgment, but intrinsically she's weakened by virtue of the relationship that she finds herself in. And not only that, but she's on her last limb of being in a bad situation with this relationship. And she's moving into a place where she feels completely kicked out, or where she feels completely dejected, or where she feels left out in the cold without having any essential systems of support around her in order to lift her up or make her feel better about the state of affairs that she finds herself in. So fundamentally, without even taking a look at Lord Seven, in answering the question, am I in a healthy relationship? It seems already as if the answer is in the negative. In the negative because of having late degrees of Scorpio rising, in the negative because of having Scorpio rising, and also in the negative because of having Mars in detriment at the final degree of Taurus before it moves into a state of peregrination. So there are several factors here that speak to the possibly ill treatment of the querent within the situation that she's in, but also the lack of fundamental health within the relationship that she finds herself in. Now, the very next thing that I look at from there is going to be the quesited, which is the person who the querent is asking about. And here, who do we have but Venus sitting happy, essentially dignified by being in her exaltation at 3 degrees Pisces, 58 minutes, and also essentially strengthened in the fourth house, which is an angular house, which gives planets 100% of power in order to express their stuff. So here we see that the querceted isn't just angularly strong, but she's also strong by being in her exaltation. And I'm saying she because this is a relationship, it's a queer relationship between two women. So this lady over here, the querent, was asking about her girlfriend who she was in a relationship with. So not only is the quesited, i.e., Venus, i.e., the girlfriend, essentially strong by being angular, but she's also essentially strong by being in the sign of her exaltation. Now, I've said in other episodes that planets in their exaltation, according to the ancients, are like people who are blowing air up their own behind. So this is a person who assumes far more of themselves than is their due. And oftentimes, when I've seen Venus in Pisces as representing either the querent or the querceted, it's a person who feels so highly of their loveliness or of their lovability that they don't actually have a realistic perception of themselves within the situation, or they don't have a realistic perception of their own merits or what they're doing or how they're being within the context of the relationship that they're asking about. So here, the automatic contrast, by way of speaking about the health of this relationship, is that the querent Mars in Taurus seems to be in a state of highly debilitated health, whereas the querceted, i.e., Venus, seems to be in a place of exalted health. So the querent is in a place where she's weakened, and the querceted is in a place where she's strengthened, showing a clear disconnect between the power that the two of them share within the context of the relationship. And she, quesited, seems to be far more powerful than the person actually asking the question. Now, interesting things about the quesited is that she is conjunct the fourth house cusp. And the conjunction to the fourth house cusp may be symbolic of the quesited having a fundamental stake in the ground insofar as the home is concerned. And when I said this to the querent, she confirmed that this was the truth because she at the time was living with her partner. So indications that she's living with her partner can be seen from not really the fact that she's over here in the seventh house, but the fact that the quesited is conjunct the fourth house cusp, which may be symbolic of the quesited having, like I said, a stake in the ground insofar as the home is concerned. And also, she's exalted in that space, which says that this may be a space where she's able to glorify or be glorified, whereas the querent is really under the domain or under the power of her. Now, while I don't actually consider this to be a majorly important piece, what I do think is important, since we're asking about the health of this relationship, is that the quesited isn't just the ruler of the seventh house, but Lord Seven is also the ruler of the sixth house, which is technically the house of sickness, slaves, servitude, just in general. So the ruler of sickness is also the ruler of the relationship itself, which may also be adding a flavor to our interpretation that this may not necessarily be the healthiest relationship for the querent to be in. What we also find is that Lord Seven, or rather Lord One, i.e. Mars, is also Lord 12, which would be the ruler of the house of self-undoing and hidden enemies. And oftentimes when we find the ruler of the first being also the ruler of the 12th, it brings up a sensation that the person may actually be working against their own highest good, and they might actually be the reason why they're in the shitty state of affairs that they may find themselves in. And when I said this to the querent in far more nicer ways than I'm saying right now, that also proved to be true, that she realized that she was putting herself in a state of fundamental distress by being in the relationship that she was in. But at the same time, she was so strongly attached to the relationship that she felt as if there was anyone to do any movement away from the relationship, it wouldn't be her. It would have to be the other person. Now, other interesting things that I find within this chart is that the moon, which we know is the general significator of the querent or of the question in any horary, would have just been or would have left Capricorn, where the moon is in her detriment, Capricorn being the opposite sign to Cancer. And at that final degree of Capricorn, i.e. 29 degrees Capricorn, the moon would have been making a trine to Mars at 29 degrees of Taurus. So here we see that this moon, now peregrine at 0 degrees Aquarius, is essentially in a position to translate the light or carry the power and the influence from Mars to whatever is the next planet that she applies to, she being the moon. Now, the next planet that the moon applies to is going to be a square to Uranus. A square to Uranus in one fixed cadent time unit. Now, fixed signs in cadent houses, we've been told by the ancients, describes an unknown length of time. But fixed signs in general describe a length of time that is far longer than would be described by the common or mutable signs or the movable or cardinal signs. So, what I'm looking at, given the context of the situation that we're in right now, is that within one fixed time unit or one fixed cadent time unit, that moon is going to apply to that Uranus. And when that moon applies to that Uranus, that might signify the end of the relationship. Now, it being cadent means that I wasn't necessarily able to, or rather, I wasn't necessarily comfortable to give her a length of time when that would have happened. But internally, I kind of felt that it would happen within the space of 1 month, just based on the general state of debilitation that the querent seemed to be in and that the relationship itself seemed to be in at the time of the question. Now, Uranus is the grand severer, and I find myself quoting Rupertus Stella time and time again because Uranus seems to be showing up in these relationship questions time and time again. But Uranus, within the context of relationships, oftentimes signifies the end of that relationship. So if we think of the moon applying to that Uranus by a square, what we see is that that square application of the moon to Uranus could very well indicate the painful or harsh ending of the relationship that the querent currently finds herself in. Uranus, as we can see, is also strongly conjunct the sixth house cusp. So once again, based on our theme of answering, is this a healthy relationship? Uranus conjunct the sixth house cusp can also be an indication that no, this isn't a healthy relationship, and it might actively be shattering your health. Uranus having an indication of things that break or things that fall apart or things that end in a violent upheaval. And Uranus, in and of itself, just not necessarily being the best thing for anyone's peace of mind or anyone's health in general. So that is what we see in terms of the moon and its application, and also the moon itself being peregrine, leaving a state of being essentially debilitated in its detriment in Capricorn to now being peregrine, is echoing the story of our Mars being essentially debilitated by being in its detriment in Taurus and moving into a state of peregrination in Gemini. Now, the only true dignity that this Mars has is dignity by, that would be dignity by term or bound, because Mars rules the final, let's see, Taurus. Mars rules the final 4 degrees of Taurus in terms of bound rulership. Right. Mars rules the final 4 degrees of Taurus because we have Saturn ruling up to the 26th degree of Taurus, and Mars will rule up to the 30th degree of Taurus. So anyway, here we see Mars in its own bound or term, but when a planet is in its own bound or term, what that indicates is that the person partakes more of the nature of that planet. So here we have Mars already indicating our querent, and she's in her own bound or term, which is indicative of the fact that she may be articulating herself within this question in a very Martian, fiery way, or a Mars to the nth degree sort of way. So the querent may be radically impassioned or radically inflamed about maintaining the nature of the relationship as it is. Radically impassioned and radically inflamed, coming from the concept of Mars being in Mars's own bound. And even though the nature of the relationship is not a good one, it still doesn't change the fact that she is fired up or she's inflamed about maintaining the structure of the relationship in the way that it is, because oftentimes when we want for a relationship to last, we're willing for that relationship to last in a negative state than for that relationship to no longer exist. And that's kind of the situation that our querent finds herself in. And going back to the quested is sitting happy down here at 3 degrees of Pisces, essentially exalted and strong angularly. So the quesited may not have either any regard to the querent in terms of the querent's current state of mind, or even in terms of the querent's current peace of mind within the context of the relationship, because the quesited herself is so highly elevated by being exalted that she's really only seeing the things that are wonderful and noble about who she is and what she's doing. Now, while this is the fourth house of the question of the radical chart in general, i.e., the quesited having power and dominion over the household, this is also the 10th house of the quesited. If we were to start the chart by using the 7th house as the first house of the quesited and going around, this would be the 10th house, which says that the quesited may have her career on her mind far more than she has this relationship on her mind, which also proves to be true within the context of the feedback that I received from the querent. Now, in the same way as the querent is ruling her own 12th house, the quesited is ruling her own 12th house, which says that the quesited herself may be doing things that are leading to her own undoing, or that may be fundamentally working against her within the relationship that she's in, or just within her life in general. Now, since the quesited wasn't necessarily my client, I can't corroborate that, but that's a thought that I have here as well, that the quesited is so highly exalted being in Pisces that she doesn't even realize the ways in which she herself is screwing up within the context of the relationship. And if I am doing so well down here as the quesited, and I see my querent or I see my partner over here suffering, I may be of the persuasion that it might be my partner's own fault for their suffering, and that suffering may not necessarily have anything to do with me. So that is another thought regarding this. So here we see that the very last aspect that the quesited made, i.e. Venus, was a sextile to Uranus conjunct her own 12th house cusp within two angular mutable time units. Now, mutable signs in angular houses is an indication of months, we're told. So what that might be an indication of is that 2 months ago, the quesited effected some Uranian shift within the fabric of the relationship. And I feel as if I'm continuously referencing Stella Rupertus, or rather Rupertus Stella, when he says that Uranus, in relationship to these questions about relationships, brings about the breaking or the severance of those relationships. And that's a loose paraphrase from his book, The Astrologian's Guides to Horary Astrology. So the Venus-Uranus connection can be an indication that probably 2 months ago, the quesited had already moved away from the relationship itself. Or 2 months ago, the quesited had already made up within her mind that the relationship was something that she wanted to break off. And we see that the next aspect that Venus makes is going to be a conjunction to Neptune. Now, Neptune is the planet of illusion and delusion and fantasy and idealization of love. And so, what we might find with this is that the quasited is moving into a field of fantastical idealizations of love that have nothing to do with the actual relationship that she's in. Because Neptune is also a planet of deception. So, if the quasited has already broken off the relationship 2 months ago, as would be implied by the Venus Uranus connection, then what we could see is that she is rightfully moving into another relationship that has the feel of a Neptunian love fest for her, which may be a complete reprieve from her when we take into consideration what the relationship between her and our querent may have been. And truthfully, if I'm someone seeing a Neptunian contact on the horizon, Neptune, which has the ability to trick us and fool us and make us feel as if the thing that we're seeing through rose-colored glasses is actually, in fact, rose-colored. When I compare that thing against the reality of the relationship that I currently have, that thing on the horizon may be a far greater thing that I want to run towards, as opposed to the relationship that I would have had with the partner who I just would have left, i.e., the querent. So, for all intents and purposes, it seems as if the quasited is moving in a direction that takes her further away from the querent and not towards the querent. And also, though this may not even be applicable to anything, the fact that Mercury is essentially in shit shape by being in Pisces, where it's both in detriment and fall, and conjunct that Neptune, may be an indication that there isn't necessarily the greatest amount of honesty between them right now to begin with. So probably the quasited, who is still owner of the house that the querent finds herself in, literally, because the querent is living with her lover or with the girlfriend, potentially that quasited girlfriend is already affecting things in the direction of this Mercury-Neptune conjunction. That means that there may not be the greatest amount of clarity, or there may not be the greatest amount of honesty going on between them right now. And perhaps the quasited, because in her mind she's already left the relationship, has already begun the pursuit of something different. So, all in all, the indications don't seem to be that great in terms of the health of this relationship. So, all that being said, we do see a strong disconnect in terms of the power that the querent has within the relationship, as well as the power that the quasited has within the relationship. And if we were looking for a potential perfection between the two of them, the person who would have to effect any perfection between them would be the quasited, or would be Lord Seven. And here we see that there is no perfection to be made between this Venus at 3 degrees Pisces and this Mars at 29 degrees Taurus. That would be of any true benefit for the relationship. So, in answering the question of whether or not the querent is in a healthy relationship, it seems to be that the answer is no. Because based on the entire outline of the chart, we see something where the quasited, the girlfriend who she's asking about is doing far better and in a state of moving further away from the relationship than our querent herself. And that's about it for this reading. That one was definitely a toughie for me, especially when it came down to describing for the querent just the general state of affairs that the chart indicated. But what was even tougher for me was that after speaking about all of that with the querent, her question was still, but is there some way for me to save it? Or is there some way for me to prevent her from breaking up with me? Because regardless of how bad it is, regardless of the fact that I've had countless sleepless nights, regardless of the fact that I cried myself to sleep on the side of her, I would still rather be with her than suffer another breakup. And I think that that's a really tough thing to deal with, and that's a really tough question to answer, because here we have a chart that is so dynamically profound in its articulation of a very specific truth. And here we find that truth coming up very harshly against the truth that that person wants to hold on to. So thank you once again for joining me here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. And I truly hope that you're enjoying exploring these Horary Astrology case studies with me. And I also hope that if you don't already practice Horary Astrology, that these podcasts inspire you to get out there and do it. I love being able to come here and share with you. And if you guys want to connect with me, please do like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can keep abreast of the wonderful things that I'm bringing you from the wonderful world of Horary Astrology from both myself and other people who are going to be joining me here on the show. And also, if you want to connect with me, whether for a reading or to learn Horary Astrology for yourself, please feel free to check out my website at www.tarotdharma.com, which I'm going to put in the link below. Until next time, be well, and thank you once again for joining me.